In a country where politics often felt like a shouting match between giants, one quiet, mathematically minded man tried to win with numbers, discipline, and sheer nerve. And here's the contrast that should bother you. Waziri Ibrahim, one of Nigeria's most educated, most technically gifted leaders in waiting, would spend his life circling the presidency like a comet, close enough to burn, never allowed to land. The clock starts early for him, long before anyone calls him politician, because in this story, time isn't just passing, time is hunting him. He's born on February 26, 1926, in the broad, sunlit geography of northern Nigeria, into a society where lineage matters, where community, expectations press down like heat, and where what you will become is often decided before you can even spell your name. But the boy who will later stand under the harsh lights of national power begins as a child of routines, prayer, school, responsibility. There are no cinematic explosions here, just the slow, relentless sound of ambition forming, the kind of ambition that doesn't scream, the kind that calculates. Nigeria in the 1930s and 1940s is still under British colonial rule. That means two things at once. The country is being modernized and constrained in the same breath. Railways, institutions, exams, yes, but also ceilings, invisible lines of who gets to lead and who is expected to obey. Young Waziri grows up watching that contradiction, and he responds the way some people do when the world tries to limit them. He over-prepares. He studies like someone who suspects life will not give him a second chance. In school, he shows the signs that frighten and impress teachers, the ability to grasp concepts too quickly, the kind of student whose answers arrive before the question is fully spoken. He is drawn toward science and logic, toward the clean comfort of things that can be proven. That detail matters. Because later, when he walks into politics, Nigeria's most emotional arena, he will bring the instincts of an analyst into a room full of performers. And that is both his superpower and his weakness. He moves through the educational ladder at a time when education is not just personal achievement. It is social mobility, political, leverage, and sometimes even a subtle rebellion. In communities where many brilliant children never get the chance, the ones who do are watched closely. You are not only learning for yourself, you are learning for everyone who will never sit in that classroom. Waziri feels that pressure. He carries it the way a strong man carries weight, outwardly steady, inwardly straining. Then the path widens. He heads abroad for higher studies, and the shift is like stepping into a different temperature. Suddenly, the world is larger than the maps he grew up with. In Britain, one of the key centers of the very empire that governs his homeland, he studies at a high level, earning a degree in chemistry. Chemistry, the science of change, reactions, and invisible forces. He learns how small differences in conditions can transform outcomes dramatically. Again, that detail matters. Because politics is chemistry too. One missing ingredient, one wrong timing, and everything detonates. And while he is there, he's not just absorbing formulas. He is absorbing contrasts. The careful order of institutions, the cold confidence of established states, the quiet assumption that their way is the default way. But he is also absorbing something else. The idea that a colonized person can master the master's tools and then use them for his own society. When he returns, he enters public life first through competence rather than charisma. He becomes a civil servant, part of the administrative backbone that keeps a state running even when politicians argue overhead. For someone like Waziri, civil service makes sense. It rewards precision, planning, and continuity. It's the nearest thing to a laboratory that a young professional can find inside a growing nation. He works, he learns, he rises. Nigeria approaches independence like a train gaining speed. The 1950s are charged. People are debating not only who should lead, but what the country even is. Regions pull in different directions. Ethnic identities harden, soften, and harden again depending on the room. Ambition thickens the air. In this moment, being smart isn't enough. You must also be useful to power. Waziri's usefulness is undeniable. He is educated, disciplined, and capable of managing complex systems. He is the kind of man leaders want near them when the numbers have to add up, when the policy must actually function, when the optimistic speeches must become budgets, institutions, and industries. Yet he is also the kind of man who can become threatening, because competence can outshine charisma, and in politics, that can be dangerous. He drifts closer to the front lines of national life. The early years after independence are hopeful and brittle at the same time. Nigeria is officially free, but the new state is still learning how to be itself. And every powerful figure is quietly measuring every other powerful figure, asking the silent question, will you be my ally or my rival? This is where the rival enters the story. Not as a cartoon villain, but as a force, a competitor for influence, access, and eventually leadership. Think of this rival as the type of politician Nigeria produces in abundance during turbulent times. Socially magnetic, strategically, connected, built for public battles. Where Waziri's method, the rival is momentum. Where Waziri's calculation, the rival is instinct. And the more Waziri rises, the more this rival's shadow rises too, always at the edge of the frame. Waziri is not naive. He understands what kind of arena he is stepping into, but he also believes, perhaps dangerously, that Nigeria can be run like a serious project. That if you put the right people in the right places, plan the economy carefully, build institutions, invest in industry, the country, this potential will become real. It's a rational belief. It is also a belief that collides with a simpler reality. Power does not always reward what is best. Power rewards what wins. Still, he pushes forward. His reputation grows, educated, technocratic, steady. He becomes associated with the northern political establishment. Yet he is not merely an ornament. He is a thinker, a planner, a man whose mind is always running one step ahead, like he is trying to solve a puzzle before the pieces arrive. But Nigeria in the 1960s is not a puzzle. It is a storm. Coups rupture the young republic. The military steps in. The national mood changes overnight. The way a sky turns black without warning. This is not just political drama. It is real violence, real fear, real uncertainty about whether the country will even remain one country. And for a man like Waziri, who believes in structure and systems, this is an existential challenge. How do you plan a future when the present is exploding? This is where his path takes a critical turn. He enters a higher tier of responsibility. He is brought closer to decision-making, to the places where survival strategies are written. He sees the machinery of state from the inside, the budgets that determine which regions develop and which stagnate, the negotiations where smiles hide threats, the meetings where people talk about unity while counting votes, soldiers, and loyalties. And while the nation tries to stitch itself back together, Waziri is doing something else too. He is building a profile that can't stay hidden forever, because in times of crisis, competence becomes rare, and rare things attract attention. But attention is a double-edged blade. The more he becomes known as the man who can make plans work, the more he becomes a target for those who survive on chaos. And the competitor, his rival, understands this perfectly. The rival doesn't need to defeat Waziri in a debate. The rival only needs to keep Waziri from becoming inevitable. You can feel the pressure increasing now because the stakes are no longer personal. They are historical. Nigeria is heading toward a new kind of political order. And the question isn't just who will lead. It's what type of leader will Nigeria allow to rise? A builder or a fighter, a calculator, or a performer? Waziri begins to sense something unsettling, that the country he wants to serve is also a country that may not reward his style of leadership. He has the qualifications, he has the discipline, he has the mind. But politics is not an exam. There is no fair grading system. There are only alliances, timing, and the ability to survive the next turn. And then the time limit arrives, the first one. Not a literal stopwatch, but a political deadline that functions like one. Windows open and they slam shut. Moments appear when a man can step forward and become permanent, or hesitate and become history. Waziri is approaching such a window. The military era is shifting, and civilian possibilities are beginning to shimmer at the horizon. Those who position themselves early will dominate the next chapter. His rival positions himself early. Waziri watches networks form. He watches promises being traded like currency. He watches influence moving through rooms faster than policy ever could. And he has to choose. Remain the competent man behind the scenes, respected but replaceable. Or step into the fire, where competence alone won't save you. He chooses the fire. Not because he suddenly becomes thirsty for applause, but because he understands the brutal math. If people like him do not step forward, then the future will be written by people who never needed to understand the numbers. He starts moving from administration toward open political contest. He begins aligning, speaking, preparing. It is not yet the full leap, but it is the approach. The moment the camera slowly zooms in and you realize the character has crossed a line. And in the background, the rival is smiling, because rivalry is not always loud. Sometimes it's polite, sometimes it looks like friendship, sometimes it looks like good luck. But it is a race all the same. By the end of this stretch of his life, Waziri Ibrahim is no longer just a brilliant northerner with foreign education and a civil service resume. He is becoming a national figure with a dangerous idea in his head, that Nigeria can be engineered toward prosperity, not merely argued into it, that the future can be built deliberately. It's a hopeful idea. And in Nigeria's arena, hope can get you hurt, because as he steps closer to the center, he doesn't just gain power, he gains enemies, and he gains a clock, a ticking, invisible clock set by political cycles, by military decisions, by rival factions, by impatient citizens, by the simple, fact that history does not wait for careful men. And somewhere ahead, just out of sight, there's a moment when Waziri will have to gamble everything he has built, not against the nation, his problems, but against his rival's ability to outmaneuver him at the worst possible time. That moment is coming. And the terrifying part is, he can feel it. By the time he steps fully into the fire, the irony is brutal. The man with no soldiers under his command suddenly controls more of Nigeria's future than some generals. He doesn't wear medals, he wears figures. Not stripes, but spreadsheets. In a country just crawling out of war, where bodies are still being counted and cities still smell of ash, Waziri Ibrahim sits in rooms where a single line in a budget can determine whether a ruined town is rebuilt or left to rot forever. He has power now, real power, but it is power on loan, surrounded by men who believe that a gun and a uniform outrank any plan. He becomes one of the key civilian brains in a military government that is trying to convince the world, and itself, that it can rebuild. The title on his door changes. The scope of his responsibility explodes. He is pulled into economic planning, development, reconstruction, the complicated, messy work of turning promises of rehabilitation into concrete roads, working factories, reopened schools. On the wall of his office, there's a giant map of Nigeria, pinholes pressed into it where decisions will land. Each colored pin is a project. A new road here, a dam there, an industrial estate near a port, a hospital in a town that still remembers the sound of air raids. He doesn't see pins, he sees equations. If you build this road first, that region grows. If you delay that port, exports suffer. If you ignore that far corner of the Northeast, resentment deepens like a crack in a dam. He works late into the night under fluorescent lights, tracing routes with a ruler, scribbling numbers that will become billions in contracts. Outside, soldiers come and go in boots that echo on the corridor floor. Inside, Waziri's weapon is a pen, and it signs off on more money than some states will see in decades. But power without a vote is a fragile thing. He knows it. The rival knows it too. Where Waziri disappears into files and feasibility studies, his rival is busy doing something else, stitching himself into the emotional fabric of the country. He visits barracks and palaces, drinking tea with officers, bowing just so to traditional rulers, telling them what they most want to hear. When the time comes, I will protect your interests. He speaks the language of loyalty, not logic. And in private conversations, he plants seeds that men like Waziri are useful, yes, but dangerous. They are not tied to anyone, he whispers. They are tied only to their ideas. The broader country is watching the military with suspicion. After the trauma of civil war, the promise of a return to civilian rule hangs in the air like a rumor of rain. The generals talk about transition in vague phrases. In due course, at the appropriate time. For Waziri, those phrases sound like a ticking clock. Every extra year in uniform is a year in which the political field is being quietly prepared. Networks are forming, expectations hardening. He understands something many of his colleagues ignore. If you wait until elections are announced to start doing politics, you have already lost. Yet his days are swallowed by the machine of governance. He is solving immediate crises. Rice shortages here, inflation there, angry delegations complaining that their regions are being neglected. He flies over the country in rattling military aircraft, inspecting projects that are more promise than reality, foundations laid and abandoned, cranes frozen in place against the sky, rust already mouthing the edges of newly delivered steel. This is the part of power nobody films. The frustration of watching good plans drown in incompetence, corruption, and the sheer weight of a system that was never built to work smoothly. Slowly something hardens in him, a realization that as long as he remains a commissioner, a minister, an advisor, he is always downstream from the real current. Generals can wake up one morning, sign a piece of paper, and erase years of his work. His rival, meanwhile, is positioning himself as the interpreter of the future, close to the officers, popular with civilians, whispering in every ear that matters. So Waziri does something that shocks almost everyone around him. At a moment when his influence in government is near its peak, when foreign envoys ask for him by name, when local businessmen measure their chances by whether they can get on his calendar, he resigns, walks away, steps out of the corridors where he has spent so many nights calculating the country's trajectory. To some, it looks insane. Who leaves power in a country where people kill to get a taste of it? But he isn't walking away from power. He is trying to change its source. He moves into business like a man changing laboratories. Instead of ministry offices, he now sits in boardrooms. Instead of state budgets, he manages private capital. He invests in trading, transport, construction, maybe even shipping. Anything that touches the arteries of a country exploding with oil money and demand. Nigeria in the 1970s is awash with petrodollars. Imports surge, contracts multiply. The phrase oil boom is not an exaggeration, it is a daily reality. Ships stacked in ports, cranes grinding, warehouses filling with goods. Most people, confronted with that flood, just try to grab a bucket and scoop as fast as they can. Waziri tries to build pipes. He sets up companies with real structures, accountability, planning. He hires young graduates and trains them, demanding the same discipline from them that he demands from himself. His days start before dawn, and often end when the city has already switched off most of its lights. By the end of this phase, he is not just comfortable, he is rich. Not rumor rich, but balance sheet rich. Assets, fleets, employees, partnerships. In a country where businessman is often code for middleman, he stands out as something rarer. A builder. Money in this context is more than comfort. It is political independence. While he's building this economic fortress, his rival is building something else. A political machine. The rival cultivates partymen, union leaders, youth mobilizers, newspaper editors. He listens to grievances in smoky back rooms and promises relief he has no intention of actually delivering. He appears at weddings and funerals in communities that have never seen a federal official before. If Waziri is investing in factories, the rival is investing in feelings. The countdown suddenly becomes visible when the military finally commits to a date. Nigeria will return to civilian rule. A new republic, a new constitution, elections. Overnight, the country erupts into organizing. Old political names reappear, dusting off their banners, their slogans, their grudges. New alliances form, fray, and reform. For Nigerians who have waited so long, hope and cynicism mix like fuel. For Waziri, the message is simple and terrifying. Time's up. He cannot buy time with money. He cannot slow the calendar with logic. The transition timetable is published in black and white. Party registration, primaries, campaigns, election day. He has months, not years, to transform himself from respected businessman and former minister into an electable national figure. His rival, of course, has been preparing for this moment the entire time. Waziri steps back into formal politics, not as a client or an errand boy, but as a stakeholder. He helps to form a broad party that promises to cut across regions and ethnic lines, attracting old anti-colonial fighters, younger, technocrats and idealistic professionals. On paper, it's powerful. A pan-Nigerian force anchored in the idea that the country deserves something better than recycled wartime slogans. He brings in funding, strategy, and, perhaps most dangerously, a belief that the party should be more than one man's property. Inside this party, the fault line appears almost immediately. At one end stands a charismatic elder statesman, beloved by many, electrifying at rallies, accustomed to being the center of gravity. At the other end stands Waziri, quieter, more modern, more obsessed with internal rules, transparency, structures. He argues that if Nigeria is rebuilding its democracy, it cannot afford to build parties like cults. There must be procedures, there must be internal elections, there must be room for multiple strong figures. To the elder and his loyalists, this sounds suspiciously like disloyalty. The rival watches all this with satisfaction. He is not in this party. He is cultivating his own path, closer to the military establishment, closer to the levers that will matter when the dust settles. But he understands one timeless truth of politics. If your enemy is busy fighting his friends, you do not interfere. You just make sure the fight gets worse. As the party approaches its national convention, the atmosphere becomes electric, then poisonous. Delegates fly in from across the country, their loyalties bought and rebought. Hotel rooms become auction houses for future promises. Contracts, appointments, vague guarantees of consideration. The elders' camp tells anyone who will listen that Waziri is trying to steal the party with his money. Waziri's camp counters that they are trying to modernize it, to make it competitive nationally instead of being a nostalgia machine. The convention becomes a theater of long speeches and longer nights. On the floor, sweat and confusion. In the smoke-filled side rooms, the real decisions. Waziri runs numbers on scribbled sheets of paper, tallying delegates, recalculating after every defection. The result is devastatingly clear. The elder will win the presidential ticket. The party will go into the general election led by a man who barely tolerates him. This is the point where most politicians swallow their pride and cut a deal. Accept a lower position, vice president, minister in waiting, anything to stay close to the center of power. Waziri chooses a harder, riskier path. Again, he walks out, not from the convention hall only, but from the party itself. With the election calendar mercilessly ticking, he announces a new vehicle, the Great Nigeria People's Party, GNPP, a party named not after a person or a tribe, but after an ideal. Critics laugh. You want to build a national party in months? They ask. When others have spent years? But he is past the point of caring about their laughter. He has bet his future on one idea, that Nigerians are tired of politics as a blood sport. His slogan crystallizes that gamble in 4 words: politics without bitterness. It sounds naive in a country where elections have often been preludes to chaos. But in town after town, when he says it into microphones perched on shaky wooden platforms, people go quiet. Bitter people are tired of bitterness too. Mothers who lost sons in the war, traders squeezed by inflation, farmers forgotten by distant cities. They listen to this soft-spoken man who refuses to spit venom at his opponents and instead talks about roads, schools, electricity, justice. Building a party at that speed is like trying to construct a house on a moving truck. Offices are rented overnight, walls painted in party colors that are still wet by morning. Symbols are designed sometimes by candlelight. Candidate lists are drawn up in ridiculous conditions. Stacks of files on the floor, local leaders phoning from villages where the line crackles with every word. The GNPP rushes to print posters, organize rallies, register candidates in every corner permitted by the law. Meanwhile, the rival and his allies are cruising on smoother roads. Their parties have more time, more structure, sometimes the quiet backing of those in uniform. The establishment looks at Waziri's experiment and decides that while he should be tolerated, he must never be allowed to become decisive. Subtle pressures begin. A bank suddenly tightens credit to one of his companies. A government agency delays permits for his businesses. Party organizers in certain regions report that hall bookings vanish overnight after local officials receive advice. On the campaign trail, the inequality is visible. The rival arrives in a convoy of siren-blaring vehicles, greeted by local authorities who line up in carefully pressed uniforms. Waziri often arrives in smaller groups, sometimes even in worn-out planes that land on unlit runways in the dusk. His team counts every naira. They reuse banners. They repair loudspeakers themselves when they fail mid-speech. Yet the crowds come. In some northern towns, people climb trees just to get a better look at him. In eastern cities, they test his message of politics without bitterness against their memories of war and betrayal. In markets, he is pulled aside by women who speak in low voices about the price of food, the fear of the future, the worry that all this talk of democracy is just cosmetic. He answers with numbers and plans, how state revenues can be used, how industries can be cited, how youth can be trained. He doesn't shout, he explains, but explanation has its limits. His voice grows hoarse from endless rallies. His eyes carry dark crescents like shadows of the clock that stalks him. Doctors tell him to slow down, to sleep, to at least shorten his speeches. He smiles and does the opposite. Every lost day is a lost state. Every canceled rally is a rumor that he is giving up. And in this race, perception can be lethal. For a moment, it looks like the impossible might happen. Early reports suggest GNPP is surging in parts of the Northeast and Middle Belt. Newspapers that had previously ignored him start to mention his name with a new tone. Not as a curiosity, but as a contender. In private, some of his opponents worry. If the election is fragmented enough, if no single candidate reaches the required threshold, coalition politics will decide the presidency. And in coalition rooms, a calm, wealthy, technocratic man with nationwide votes is a dangerous kingmaker. The rival moves to shut that door before it fully opens. Smear campaigns appear almost overnight. Pamphlets whisper that Waziri is too rich to care about ordinary people, that his business interests will devour the state, that he is secretly aligned with foreign powers who want to control Nigeria's oil. Old grudges are dug up and exaggerated. In some regions, powerful local figures in GNPP quietly tell their followers to support the party locally, but vote differently for president, a double game to secure favor with the likely winner. Election day comes not as a festival, but as a test of endurance. Under a blazing sun, Nigerians line up, fingers inked, hearts heavy with suspicion and hope. In villages, people walk miles to vote. In cities, rumors of rigging circulate before the first ballot is even counted. Waziri spends the day in a tightly controlled routine, visiting a few polling stations, receiving briefings, watching numbers scribbled on makeshift tally sheets. He knows better than to trust any early result. Night falls. The radio becomes the country's heartbeat. In dim-lit living rooms, people huddle around crackling broadcasts as results are announced in fragments. One state, then another. His campaign office is a storm of papers, cigarettes, muttered prayers. On some boards, red circles appear around regions he has clearly captured. On others, the numbers are heartbreakingly close, but not enough. Nationally, the pattern hardens. He is strong, but not dominating. Influential, but not inevitable. The real drama unfolds behind the scenes, in the narrow window allowed for alliances before final certification. There is a mathematical path, his strategists argue. If the opposition candidates can set aside their egos, unite, and challenge the declared outcome, they might force a runoff, a negotiation, a new arrangement. Phones ring through the night. Emissaries shuttle between hotel rooms. But time, always time, is brutal. Deadlines loom, to file petitions, to announce positions, to either resist or accept. His rival, backed by the strongest machine, moves quickly to lock down legitimacy. Congratulatory messages are orchestrated. International observers issue cautious statements. Local power brokers decide it is safer to align with the apparent winner. The air thickens with that familiar Nigerian mixture of resignation and anger. When the official result is finally announced, it hits like a punch. Waziri has lost. Not humiliated. Millions of people have written his name on their ballots, but pushed aside by a system that rewards those who got there. First, who owned the machinery? Who made the deals he refused to make? GNPP wins governors, legislators, real influence in some states. But the presidential villa belongs to someone else. His team is furious. They have seen enough irregularities, enough suspicious numbers, enough vanished ballots to fill a dossier. They demand a fight. Court actions, mass rallies, perhaps even calls for strikes. They lay out scenarios in which they can drag the process out, delegitimize the winner, force concessions. The legal deadline for filing challenges ticks closer. 48 hours, 36, 24. Waziri listens. He hears the pain in their voices. He feels his own disappointment like a physical weight. This was likely his best shot at the ultimate office. The clock has taken something from him it will never give back. Then he does something that startles even those who think they know him best. He refuses to set the country on fire for his personal ambition. He denounces irregularities, yes. He criticizes the shortcomings of the process, yes. But he insists that his party will not take Nigeria back to the brink. Politics without bitterness cannot just be a slogan when you win. It must also be a discipline when you lose. He chooses, in that narrow, breathless window, to live by his own words. The rival assumes the presidency. The system moves on. In the quiet after the storm, he walks through campaign offices emptied of noise. Posters bearing his face lean against walls, their colors fading already, like memories exposed to harsh light. Banners are folded, stacked in dusty corners. Every piece of paper is a reminder of how close he came to a different life. But this defeat is not the end. It is a pivot. He is now something new in Nigerian politics. A man who has tasted power without clinging to it at any cost. A national figure whose party controls real territory, whose slogan has entered the language, whose supporters still believe that he represents a different way of doing politics. He has not captured the presidency, but he has captured something else, a kind of moral leverage, a proof of concept. Yet he knows the truth that his smile sometimes hides. History is not generous with second chances. The next cycle will come faster than anyone expects. The rival is now firmly seated, using all the instruments of state to strengthen his position. The clock that once measured political deadlines now measures something far more personal. How long Waziri's body, mind, and courage can keep defying the brutal arithmetic of Nigerian power. He has lost a race, he has not lost the war. But from here on, every move will cost more, cut deeper, and bring him closer to the one limit no strategist can negotiate with: time itself. The strangest thing about losing a presidential election is this: sometimes it makes you more dangerous. A man who almost took the big prize and didn't burn the house down on his way out gains something rarer than power. He gains credibility. While the new president is still measuring curtains in the villa, there are Nigerians quietly saying a sentence that frightens every incumbent. You know, if things get worse, we know who else we can turn to. That sentence follows him like a shadow. In the months after the election, when the posters with his face are still peeling off street corners, he refuses to vanish. He returns to his office not as a defeated man, but as the leader of a party that commands states, legislators, and millions of votes. GNPP is not a footnote. It governs in parts of the Northeast, sits in assemblies, shapes budgets. If the presidency is the throne, he now rules the battlefield beneath it. He travels, not with the frenetic desperation of the campaign, but with the measured insistence of a man building something more durable. In Maiduguri, he sits with GNPP governors, tracing lines on state maps like he once did on national ones. Roads to link forgotten, villages, irrigation schemes to make dry land feed more mouths, industrial layouts that might turn raw cotton into fabric instead of exporting it away. In the Middle Belt, GNPP legislators bring him files, reports of how federal allocations evaporate between the capital and the countryside, and how promises of development arrive late or not at all. He pushes his people hard. If we govern like them, he tells a room of GNPP officials one humid evening, then politics without bitterness is just decoration. He demands that state budgets are published, that contractors deliver, that civil servants are promoted by merit as often as by name. It is not a revolution. It is something more difficult in Nigeria at that moment: basic seriousness. His achievement, quietly, is that in GNPP pockets of the country, citizens begin to notice something unusual. Government that, while imperfect, at least looks like it is trying. From the presidential villa, the rival watches. For the man in power, the map looks different. GNPP territories are not just colors. They are threats. They are proof that another way of doing politics exists, and that its champion is still very much alive, rich, and in motion. The rivalry that began as a race for one election is mutating into something longer, more structural. One holds the state, the other holds a moral narrative. The clock that rules them both is set to 4 years. 4 years of a fragile new republic, in a country with a habit of letting soldiers reset the game whenever civilian chaos becomes unbearable. 4 years in which the rival must turn electoral victory into entrenched control, and Waziri must turn defeat into an alternative. Vision so persuasive that, when Nigerians get to choose again, they might risk change. Those 4 years begin badly for everyone. Oil prices tumble. The boom that filled government coffers in the 1970s slows, then stutters. Suddenly, there isn't enough money to sweeten every grievance. Imports that once arrived in endless queues of ships now stall. Factories that were supposed to hum start coughing. Inflation gnaws at wages. In markets from Lagos to Kano, traders mutter that life was supposed to get better after the return to civilian rule. So why does everything feel tighter? In this pressure, the rival responds the only way he knows how. Politics as distribution. More appointments, more contracts to loyalists, more patronage to those who can deliver votes or silence. His government becomes a delicate balancing act of promises. He spreads favors like plaster over cracking walls. Waziri responds differently. Freed from the daily burdens of executive office, he becomes what he once was in military government. A planner, a critic, a man wielding paper instead of police. He writes long, dense memoranda on economic policy. He summons journalists and explains calmly why the budget as written will deepen regional inequality, why subsidies need rethinking, why agriculture cannot be treated as an afterthought. His speeches in parliament galleries and at party conventions are less fiery than some would like, but they land with those who are tired of slogans. But he runs into a brutal reality. In Nigeria's Second Republic, the distance between a smart idea and an implemented policy is measured, less in merit than in alliances. On one side, the rival's ruling party builds a web of influence that stretches through ministries, parastatals, and state houses. On the other, opposition parties, GNPP included, circle each other warily, suspicious of motives, scarred by past betrayals. Old ideological lines blur under the weight of personal grudges. In smoke-filled rooms, words like progressive alliance and unity front are uttered, then dissolved in bickering over who leads, who steps aside, whose symbol goes on the ballot. He is at the center of many of those conversations. One night in Lagos, in a hotel suite where the air conditioner whines louder than the city traffic, he sits facing men who once tried to crush his presidential bid. They are strong in the West, he in parts of the North. Together on paper, they could build a firewall against the ruling party. The numbers make sense. The history does not. They remember his walkout from the old convention. He remembers how little they cared about internal democracy when it was their turn to hold the microphone. The argument goes in circles. Who will be the common candidate? Whose party will take which states? Who will accept being second? At some point, as dawn stains the curtains gray, someone suggests a move that is both pragmatic and poisonous. Let us fight them with their own weapon. Forget this politics without bitterness. We must be ready to do anything. The room falls silent, all eyes on him. He feels the weight of the words like a physical thing. He has built his name on a single promise, that he will not wreck the country just to win it. Now the temptation is right there. Drop the guard, lean into the uglier instincts, match propaganda with propaganda, intimidation with intimidation. After all, the rival's already using the advantages of incumbency. Why fight with one hand tied behind your back? He refuses, quietly but firmly. If we do that, he says, voice low, we become them. And then there is no reason for Nigeria to choose us. It is a principled stand. It is also a tactical risk. Some walk away from the talks, concluding that he is too idealistic for the brutality of Nigerian elections. Others respect him more but doubt his chances. The opposition, instead of coalescing into a single sharp spear aimed at the ruling party, begins to look like a cluster of smaller weapons, each sharp but isolated. Outside the conference rooms, the country moves toward the next election, with the exhausted determination of a sprinter forced into a second race without rest. The stakes are higher this time. Everyone knows that if the rival consolidates a second term, the state machinery will become almost impossible to dislodge without upheaval. For Waziri, this second run is nothing like the first. He is older. The lines on his face are deeper. carved by stress, sleeplessness, and the peculiar strain of carrying both business and politics on the same shoulders. His companies have weathered the economic slowdown, but not without scars. Some government contracts tied to GNPP states face sudden reviews. Audits appear at inconvenient moments. Permits take longer to process. Bureaucrats who once returned his calls instantly now hesitate, unsure whether talking to him might be noted somewhere by someone in power. His doctors warn him palpitations, blood pressure readings that creep upward. They remind him of his age, of the stresses of endless travel and heat that makes younger men collapse. You have already given the country so much, one tells him gently. Let others carry the load. Rest. Enjoy what you have built. He thanks them. Then he gets back on the road. If the first campaign made him a national name, the second begins to turn him into something else. A symbol. In dusty northern towns, children too young to remember the war chant his name, with a rhythm they've picked up from older siblings. In cities, students debate his ideas in overcrowded dormitories. Is politics without bitterness possible, or just a polite way to lose? In markets, traders who groan at rising prices still nod when his voice crackles through on transistor radios, insisting that Nigeria cannot live forever on oil alone. The rival responds as expected. More convoys, more handshakes, more strategic gifts. Bags of rice appear in key constituencies with party logos stamped on them like official seals. Roads are hastily patched near rally venues. Promises multiply. New housing schemes, expanded social programs, corrected mistakes. The state media discovers an endless appetite for the president's speeches and a mysteriously shrinking interest in opposition messages. The race is not fair, everyone knows it. But fairness has never been the operating assumption of Nigerian politics. Survival has. Waziri's gamble is that enough people are exhausted with that cynicism to try something else. Election season 2 arrives like Harmattan, dry, hazy, full of tiny particles that get into everything. On polling day, the images are eerily familiar. Long queues in the sun, voters clutching cards like fragile passports to a better future, ballot papers that flutter like restless birds in the hands of officials. But this time, the undercurrent of tension is stronger. Rumors of pre-filled results sheets, stories of ballot boxes lost on the way to collation centers. In some places, turnout is unexpectedly low, as if people have quietly concluded that nothing they do will matter. He camps with his team in a makeshift war room. Maps pinned to walls, phone lines buzzing, messengers rushing in with local reports. In some GNPP strongholds, the numbers are encouraging. In others, they are so wildly off expectations that staff stare at the sheets in disbelief. A town where he felt the ground shake from the crowd's roar reports a result that barely registers. Do you want us to announce our own figures? A younger aide asks bitterly. To show the world. He shakes his head. We will not become a second election commission, he says. We will document, we will challenge, but we will not manufacture another layer of confusion. It is a high road, and it feels, in that moment, like a lonely one. When the official results come, they are worse than they feared. The rivals' party sweeps more states than any honest tally could justify. The presidency is declared decisively theirs once again. Opposition leaders howl. Newspapers print editorials with words like massive irregularities, brazen manipulation, a danger to the republic. In GNPP offices, supporters slam fists on tables. Some weep openly. Waziri is angry. Not the controlled frustration of policy debates, but a deeper, darker anger that sits in his chest like a stone. 2 cycles. 2 chances for Nigeria to prove that civilian politics can work without the invisible hand of soldiers, and both smeared with doubt. He knows how fragile the republic is. He also knows how much fuel the rival has just poured near its foundations. He stands at a podium in front of a bank of microphones and delivers a speech that, in hindsight, feels like a warning flare. He denounces the fraud, details specific incidents, calls for reforms, insists that Nigeria cannot continue like this. But he also refuses to call his supporters into the streets. We will not respond to injustice with destruction, he says. We will not give those who do not believe in democracy an excuse to bury it again. It sounds measured. It sounds responsible. It sounds to some ears naive. Less than 6 months later, before courts can resolve anything, before Parliament can enact any of the reforms he demanded, a different clock reaches 0. Just before dawn, on the last day of the year, the rattle of gunfire and the crunch of tank tracks slice through the quiet in key cities. A stern voice takes over the radio, accusing the civilian government of corruption, incompetence, and electoral malpractice. The Constitution is suspended. Parties are banned. Politicians are ordered to report to military authorities. The rival, the man who beat him twice at the polls, is escorted out of the villa not by cheering supporters, but by soldiers. The twist is almost cruel. The chaos he refused to unleash from the opposition is now being unleashed from above. Nigeria wakes up to find that the Second Republic he helped midwife, flawed, contested, frustrating, is gone. The experiment is over. In its place, another military regime, one that promises discipline, purging of corrupt elements, a war against indiscipline. For millions of Nigerians, it is a bitter confirmation of a dangerous belief that politicians cannot be trusted with their own country. For him, it is something even more personal, a verdict on decades of work. He reports as ordered to military investigators. He sits in austere rooms under fluorescent lights, facing officers who slide files across the table, asking about campaign funds, business deals, policy decisions made years ago. His wealth, once a shield of independence, is now a target of suspicion. In a country where many have stolen from the state, the net is cast wide. Some of his colleagues are jailed. Others are banned from public office. Some simply disappear from political life, their reputations shredded in newspapers and on street corners. His own record, built carefully over years of relative transparency, stands up better than most. There are questions, but fewer smoking guns. No villas built from diverted ministry funds. No obvious kickback trails. The military government, needing some civilians who do not embody the excesses they claim to be fighting, treats him with wary respect. He is not embraced. He is not entirely crushed. But a different kind of damage is done. He is banned from active politics for a time, lumped with an entire class of former politicians, as if they were a single species of problem. His party, his creation, his instrument, his experiment, is dissolved with the stroke of a pen. GNPP's offices are sealed. Its signboards come down. The green, white, yellow of its symbols fade from public space as quickly as they once appeared. For supporters in Borno and Gongola, in the pockets where GNPP was a fact of daily life, the loss is visceral. One day they belong to a movement. The next, it is illegal to hold a meeting under its name. He turns again to what is left. His businesses, his community, his mind. In Maiduguri, he spends more time in boards of companies than in party caucuses. But even in business meetings, politics leaks in. He insists that salaries are paid on time, even when government contracts drag. He funds scholarships quietly, sending bright but poor students from the Northeast to universities they would never have seen otherwise. He donates to build classrooms, clinics, mosques, and churches, the small social infrastructure that outlasts regimes. If he cannot write laws, he will at least write checks that bend a small part of reality in the right direction. His public role shifts. Instead of rallies, he appears on panels. Instead of campaign speeches, he gives lectures on governance, development, leadership. He is increasingly introduced with new adjectives: elder statesman, experienced politician, veteran businessman. He is no longer the insurgent challenger. He is the living memory of a time when civilians, however imperfectly, tried to run their own affairs. Inside, however, the fire has not gone out. When the military, under the pressure of its own contradictions, begins murmuring about transition again, this time to a carefully managed Third Republic, his phone starts ringing more often. Younger politicians, some who were students during his first campaign and wide-eyed volunteers during his second, come to sit in his living room. They ask him how to build parties from scratch, how to negotiate without surrendering principles, how to survive the temptations that come with even a taste of power. He tells them stories: the walkout from the convention, the creation of GNPP in record time, the choice to concede peacefully in the face of a questionable result, the military coup that erased both victory and defeat. He does not turn these into self-pity. He turns them into warnings. Never build a party around one man, he tells them. Not even a good man, because good men are mortal. It is advice shaped by his own awareness of time. In private, doctors are more blunt now. Tests reveal signs that his heart is not the reliable engine it once was. Stress spikes could be dangerous. They tell him to cancel trips, to reduce engagements, to let younger men take the podium more often. At night, his body sends its own signals. Breath that comes shorter on staircases, a fatigue that sleep does not fully cure, a heaviness in the chest on days when meetings stretch endlessly. He listens, he adjusts slightly. Maybe he skips a trip he would once have insisted on making. Maybe he allows a speech to be read on his behalf at a minor event. But for the major battles, he still turns up in person. When the new military design parties, with their strange names and carefully limited options, hold their first conventions, he attends as a guest, as a counselor, sometimes as a quiet kingmaker. He watches younger politicians echo his old words: unity, development, justice, sometimes with sincerity, sometimes as mere costume. He pushes them, behind closed doors, to embrace internal democracy, to treat party constitutions as more than props. Some listen, some nod politely and return to their calculations. The rival, his old opponent, is no longer in the arena. Time and events have moved him off the board. But what Waziri is really competing with now is not a man. It is a style, a way of doing politics that measures success in how completely you crush your opponent, how efficiently you turn public office into private insurance. In that contest, the clock is cruel. Each year of transition talk that drags without real elections, each new decree that adjusts or postpones the path to civilian rule while it eats into his remaining time, he can see the horizon now, not as an abstract concept, but as a set of very real limits. How many more campaigns his body could endure, and how many more night flights, how many more 3A strategy sessions. He is approaching the age where most people in calmer countries retire to write memoirs. He is instead still teaching people how to build a republic that actually works. Late one evening, as the call to prayer floats over Maiduguri like a thin ribbon of sound, he sits at his desk, surrounded by papers. Some are business reports. Some are letters from young admirers. Some are draft proposals for constitutional reforms, ideas about restructuring the federation, decentralizing power, enforcing party transparency. He moves between them, annotating here, circling there, as if he can wrestle all these competing demands into order by force of will. The lamp on his desk throws a hard circle of light, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. It is an image that captures his life at this stage perfectly. One man, still working, in a country where darkness and illumination are constantly fighting for space. He knows more clearly than ever that he will not live forever. He may never again stand as a serious presidential candidate. The era when he could personally seize the reins of state is closing. But the era in which his ideas, his conduct, his example might shape others, that is still open if he can act fast enough. The race has changed shape, but it has not ended. Now it is no longer simply Waziri against the rival. It is Waziri Ibrahim, aging but unbent, against the one opponent that has silently measured every speech, every election, every coup from the beginning. Time. The cruelest rival is the one you can't put on a campaign poster. You can outspeak a man, outorganize a party, outspend a movement, but how do you outrun a calendar? In the years after the Second Republic is buried by soldiers, after GNPP is dissolved by decree and its flags quietly folded away, Waziri Ibrahim finds himself facing an opponent that doesn't hold rallies or print leaflets. It just ticks, quietly, relentlessly. He feels it in his chest before he hears it from any doctor. The first real warning doesn't come in a hospital. It comes in an airport lounge. He is waiting to board yet another flight between Lagos and Maiduguri, papers spread around him, when the words in front of his eyes suddenly smear into a gray fog. The room tilts, sound drains away into a distant hum. For a moment he clutches the armrest of his chair, breath shallow, suit damp with sweat, wondering if this is how it ends. Between plastic seats and fluorescent lights, his last view not of a country he has tried to serve, but of a cracked airport ceiling. Then the wave passes. By the time an aide notices and rushes toward him, he's already sitting straighter, forcing color back into his face with sheer will. "I am fine," he says, and the aide, who has seen him pull himself together for decades, half believes him. The flight boards, he gets on. Later, in a quiet consulting room with the air conditioner buzzing like an insect, a doctor looks at his test results and then at the man in front of him. "Al-Haji," he says carefully, "you have been operating at campaign pace for 20 years. Your heart has not." He taps a line on a chart. "If you continue like this, do not plan too far beyond your mid-60s. Your body is trying to warn you." The numbers on the page do something no election result ever did. They make him feel truly cornered. In his mind, two clocks overlay each other: the timetable of the military transition to another attempted republic, and the quiet, biological countdown inside his chest. Elections are being promised for the early 1990s. His body, the doctor's saying, may not give him much longer. If he wants to shape what comes next, he is on borrowed time. Outside the clinic, his world is changing again. The same military government that once declared all parties illegal now decides to create new ones from the top down. Carefully designed, formations with approved names, tested symbols, and constitutions drafted under the watchful eyes of officers. The idea is simple and chilling. Democracy, but in a straitjacket. To some of his old comrades, this is an insult. "They killed our parties, and now they will pick our replacements like brands of soap," one fumes. "No, we should boycott." Others, hungrier or more pragmatic, see opportunity in the artificial landscape. "If this is the field they give us," a younger politician shrugs, "we either play on it or go home." They all look to him for a signal. He has spent years railing against soldiers who suspend constitutions. He has also spent years building and then losing a party that at least tried to do things differently. The idea of walking away from civilian politics again, of leaving the field entirely to those who treat it as a market, makes his skin crawl. He has one more card, perhaps two, left to play. The question is how to use them. The first twist is this. When his supporters expect him to launch himself headfirst into the new party system, he doesn't. Instead, he spends months doing something few politicians in his position can be bothered to do. He listens. He sits in small rooms with teachers, traders, youth leaders, women who run cooperatives. He asks them what they expect from another transition. The answers are brutally honest. We don't believe them. A market woman in Kano tells him flatly, "They will start, they will stop, we will vote, they will change the rules. Maybe we should just find ways to feed our children and forget this politics." Her cynicism hits him harder than any hostile editorial. He realizes that his real opponent is not just the general in Doden barracks, or the younger politicians rehearsing for their first taste of power. It is the spreading conviction, quietly hardening in millions of minds, that nothing will ever really change. That politicians, whether in Agbada or Kaki, are all the same. That the only rational choice is to expect betrayal. You cannot beat that with a slogan. You have to live the counterexample. When he finally steps back into the formal political arena, it is not as the founder of a new party. Those are already prepackaged by decree, but as something more intangible and in some ways more powerful. A yardstick. In the new formations that begin to take shape, from ward meetings to national conventions, his presence is an uncomfortable mirror. Men who have spent years in backroom deals suddenly find themselves sitting across from someone whose name, whatever else one can say about it, is not associated with looting public treasuries. That is when the new rival appears. He is everything Waziri used to be. Young, energetic, from the same rough part of the country, armed with degrees, fluent in the language of modern economics. Where Waziri built his wealth in business before entering politics, this man has grown rich inside the margins of government. Consultancies, their advisory boards, facilitation fees. He knows how to navigate the corridors of the military regime. Generals slap his back. Civil servants lower their voices when he walks by. He is also, crucially, not weighed down by memories of the Second Republic. To this younger rival, the stories of 1979 and 1983 are interesting but irrelevant, like faded photographs in someone else's album. What matters is the next election, the current rules, the existing power brokers. With respect, Al-Haji, he tells Waziri at a private dinner one evening, your generation had its chance. It failed. Now, if we want to save this country, we must be realistic. Idealism is a luxury we cannot afford. The word hangs in the air between them. Realistic in the language of this new political class, means something very specific. It means fundraising dinners, where the price of a table is more than a teacher's annual salary. It means mobilization envelopes, slipped under hotel doors the night before primaries. It means paying traditional rulers to direct their subjects' votes, sponsoring opinion writers to shape headlines, promising contracts in exchange for endorsements. In other words, it means everything he once swore to resist. The younger man makes his pitch clearly. Let us work together, he says. You give us your name, your slogan, your moral credit. We give you a stake in what comes. I am not asking you to do anything dirty yourself. Just look away. Let the young people do what must be done. For a moment, the offer is intoxicating. This is the shortcut he never took. A chance to see his ideas, development, unity, a state that takes its citizens seriously, implemented. But even if through hands willing to reach into darker corners, it is also, in a more brutal sense, a recognition of his fading physical strength. If he cannot run at the front of the pack anymore, why not ride in the carriage of someone who can? The choice is framed as a question of tactics. In truth, it is a question of identity. He gives his answer without raising his voice. If politics without bitterness becomes only a banner under which others steal, he says, looking the younger man straight in the eye, then I have betrayed more than myself. I have betrayed everyone who believed me when I said we could do this differently. The rival smiles, a tight, polite smile that does not reach his eyes. The meeting ends in courteous words. But from that day, the competition is no longer abstract. In the new party of power, there will be two camps. One that traces its lineage to the hard compromises of military-guided politics, and one that insists on dragging stubborn ideals into rooms where envelopes change hands. And the clock keeps ticking. As transition deadlines are announced, adjusted, postponed, the pressure inside his circle grows. Some allies, men who walked with him through the storms of the 70s and 80s, start to defect to the younger rival's camp. They do it quietly at first, then more openly. We are tired, one confesses. We don't have your strength. If we don't join them now, we will be left outside again. It hurts more than he expected. Not because of the lost votes. They were never certain anyway. But because of what it says about the erosion of faith. If even his old comrades have started to doubt that politics without bitterness can win, what hope is there for those outside the inner circle? He responds in the only way he knows. He works harder. He travels to state capitals to speak at party seminars, gently but firmly arguing for open primaries, transparent accounts, rules that bind everyone. He hosts night meetings in his home, where young activists crowd the sitting room, knees touching, notebooks balanced on laps as they listen to him dissect constitutions and warn against shortcuts that will poison the future. He meets religious leaders, urging them to preach not just peace, but responsibility. His doctors watch this schedule with mounting alarm. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling week that spans 3 cities and more meetings than any man his age should attempt, his chest tightens again, this time not in an airport lounge, but in his own office. The pain radiates down his left arm, sweat beads on his forehead. This time he does not wave it away. An ambulance is called. Sirens cut through the traffic. In the hospital, under dim fluorescent tubes and the soft beep of monitors, the medical team manages to stabilize him. When he wakes fully, a young doctor, eyes ringed with fatigue but voice steady, delivers the verdict his elders have been circling around. Al-Haji, you have maybe a few good years at this pace. Maybe. Or you have many more if you slow down, if you delegate, if you accept that your role now is not to run everywhere, but to shape those who do. It is the closest anyone has come to putting a number on his remaining time. The second twist is this: he listens, not in the way his family might hope. He will not retire to a farm, will not take up golf, will not become a full-time grandfather. But he makes a decision that shocks almost everyone in his camp. When the new parties move toward choosing their presidential hopefuls for the next phase of the transition, men gather in his sitting room expecting him to announce another run. He does the opposite. I will not be a candidate, he says simply. The room erupts. Some stare at him as if he has just set fire to the last bridge across a river. But this is your moment, one cries. The people know you. The slogan is yours. The military are finally moving. If you don't stand now, when? He raises a hand and the noise subsides. If I stand now, he replies, the entire campaign will again be about whether Waziri himself wins or loses. I am not sure my heart, he taps his chest lightly, or this country can survive another near miss. We must build something that endures beyond me. That is the only way this idea will outlive my body. Some accuse him privately of cowardice. Others see, with a chill, the cold calculation inside his humility. By stepping back from the front line, he makes it harder for the military to dismiss the movement as one man's ambition. He also forces his younger allies to step up, to test whether they have absorbed his lessons or only memorized his slogans. The rival seizes the vacuum with ruthless efficiency. His camp dominates the primaries of the regime-designed party. Money flows like a river through hotel lobbies. Delegates, ferried from distant states, joke darkly that their votes weigh as much as the envelopes they receive. The younger man stands at podiums draped in party colors, promising everything to everyone: reform, continuity, prosperity, justice. In his speeches, he even borrows some of Waziri's phrases: service, discipline, unity, rolling them on his tongue like borrowed ornaments. Watching on television, Waziri feels a strange combination of pride and unease. His language has survived. His content has not. He still campaigns for cleaner internal party processes, for credible candidates at other levels, for a constitutional order that will not collapse the first time a president stumbles. He still travels, albeit more slowly, to small towns where people remember the old GNPP days, to universities where the students who once chanted his name are now middle-aged lecturers, telling their classes about a time when someone tried to set a different tone. The military's transition machine grinds on. Dates for local elections, gubernatorial races, National Assembly polls are announced. Posters multiply, songs are composed. Once again, Nigerians begin to imagine life under a civilian president. Even if the menu of choices is carefully curated, once again the old hope flutters, cautious and bruised but alive. Then, in April 1992, time does what no opponent has yet managed to do. The news does not break with pomp. It trickles. A phone call here, a whispered conversation there, a headline hesitating over the word dies. As if the printers don't quite believe it themselves. In Maiduguri, in Lagos, in Jos, men in dusty newspaper stalls unfold the day's edition and freeze. In offices, radios crackle. In markets, someone shouts, and conversations stop mid-sentence. Waziri Ibrahim is dead. Some say it was his heart finally claiming the debt of decades. Others mention a brief illness that moved faster than anyone expected. The exact medical description hardly matters to the people receiving the news. What they understand, instantly and viscerally, is something simpler. The man who gave their politics a different word, without bitterness, will never address another rally, never walk into another coalition meeting, never correct a draft manifesto with his fine, careful handwriting. The rival, now ascendant in the party that may yet govern, is told in a discreet side room before an important strategy session. For a few minutes, he says nothing at all. Whatever their disagreements, He knows exactly what has just happened. The one man in the country who could stand on a stage and, by sheer moral weight, question his methods without sounding like a sore loser is gone. At the funeral in Maiduguri, the crowds overflow every space. They come in from the villages where he funded boreholes and schools, from the towns where GNPP once held sway, from the universities where his lectures filled halls. They come wearing faded campaign t-shirts from 1979, carrying memories older than some of the children perched on their shoulders. Muslim prayers rise in long, solemn waves. Christian leaders bow their heads. Old political rivals send delegations. Business partners stand in the shade, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. In the thick heat, as dust hangs in the air like a visible memory, speeches are made. Some talk about his wealth and how he used it, insisting on salaries that arrived at the end of the month, paying school fees for strangers, and covering hospital bills quietly. Others talk about his courage, walking out of conventions when principles were trampled, refusing to call for violence even when cheated at the polls, submitting to investigation when soldiers took over instead of running or bargaining. The most powerful tributes, though, are the smallest. A middle-aged woman in a simple wrapper, standing at the edge of the crowd, tells a journalist how he paid for her son's surgery without ever meeting them. A former student recalls the day he heard Waziri insist that politics is a noble profession when done properly, and how that sentence stopped him from joining a smuggling ring during the lean years. A civil servant remembers seeing him in a ministry corridor, alone, carrying his own files instead of sending an aide. He is not canonized as a saint. Nigeria is too bruised, too cynical for that. But in the days after his burial, something rare happens. People reach instinctively for comparisons. They compare the size of his businesses to the absence of scandals around them. They compare the bitterness, the ethnic venom, the raw hunger for personal gain that has become standard in some quarters to his careful insistence that the other side is not an enemy, just an opponent. They compare the noise of many contemporary politicians to the quiet of one businessman turned leader who believed that how you win matters as much as whether you win. In smoky newspaper offices, editors argue over the right headline. Is he the last of the idealists? The missed president? The prophet of politics without bitterness? None of the phrases quite capture the mix of achievement and frustration his life represents. A man who built, lost, rebuilt, and yet never quite reached the summit he seemed born for. In the barracks, where the military rulers watch the civilian class with their habitual suspicion, his passing is noted and official, communique and then folded into their calculations. One less elder statesman to consult, one less moral reference point to navigate. For them, his absence simplifies some things. For Nigeria, it complicates others. Because when the next crises come, and they do in the years that follow, in the form of annulled elections, new dictatorships, creeping, corruption under other uniforms, a generation of citizens finds itself asking a quiet, dangerous question. What would have happened if the country had once entrusted power to a man who promised not to be bitter? You cannot rerun history. You cannot replay 1979 or 1983 with different result sheets. You cannot resurrect GNPP, frozen forever in the amber of memory. But you can watch the way certain phrases outlive the mouths that first formed them. Politics without bitterness becomes, in the decades after his death, both a shield and a challenge. Some politicians adopt it as a slogan, a way to soften their image while practicing the same old games. Others, more sincere, hang his portrait on their office walls as a reminder that there was once a wealthy man in Nigerian politics who did not need to steal to feel important. Civil society groups quote him in their manifestos. Students researching the Second Republic stumble over his speeches and find in them not an answer, but a standard. Even his rival, older now, his own hair graying, is occasionally asked on television about the man he once tried to outmaneuver. In those moments, the camera catches something rare in his eyes, a flicker of respect, perhaps tinged with regret. He believed in something, the rival usually says carefully. We did not always agree, but he believed, in the end, that may be the sharpest twist of all. The man who never quite conquered the highest office, who was twice denied by flawed elections and once erased by soldiers, wins a different kind of victory against the rival that outlasts them all. Time, which takes his breath and stills his heart, fails to erase his outline. It passes over his businesses, his party, his campaigns, and leaves behind stubbornly intact the one thing he refused to bargain away, a belief that politics, even in a country as wounded and complex as Nigeria, does not have to be war. It is not the ending he would have written for himself, but it is the legacy he leaves for those who come after, a challenge, a warning, and a quiet, enduring dare to anyone who would seek power in his country. Try to win, but do it without bitterness.